I'm going to get started with my piece. I'm just going to probably introduce sections as we go. I just wanted to give everybody a short, real quick history of how we got to where we are with water quality regulation. It goes back to 1899, the Rivers and Harbors Act. People always seem to ask when you're working about water quality, want to know how the Army Corps of Engineers got involved in water. And this is the answer. It goes back to this act in 1899, when Congress gave authority to the Army, in this case, because we didn't have a Navy at the time, to deal with navigable waters in the country, harbors, and a little bit about water quality. Section 9 talked about that if you wanted to do anything, any work in a river watershed, I had to look up some of these terms, roadsteads, and there was another weird term I had to look up on some of this stuff because I don't really deal with harbors and that kind of thing. But that's where Congress gave it to the Army. Section 10 says you couldn't put anything into it. You couldn't modify the stream. You couldn't modify a roadstead. A roadstead is a side inlet into a harbor or bay that you can park a boat in. There was another one in here. I'm not sure where it was. And then this is the one that kind of comes back to haunt us. Section 13 of this same act made it unlawful to put material things, non-liquid things, branches, sticks, soil, garbage, any of that kind of thing. But they allowed anything that was in a liquid state. And this comes back to haunt us when we're going to talk about point sources later on. The Federal Water Quality Act of 1965 established a Water Pollution Control Administration within the Department of Interior. It was the first time historically that we treated water quality as an environmental problem rather than a human health problem. And it kind of put the mandate down onto the states. It was one of the first big unfunded mandates, told the states go do something about water quality, and then gave them no money to do anything. The Federal Clean Waters Restoration Act started to clean up the sewage treatment plants. It provided funding for treating sewage discharges before they got into the rivers. And then in 1970, President Nixon asked Congress for the authority to reorganize the federal pollution agencies from out of the Department of Interior and Department of Consumer Protection and a couple other agencies, and created the Environmental Protection Agency. In 1971, the Connecticut legislature passed Public Act 827, which created the Department of Environmental Protection at the time, and gave them the authority to manage the protection and preservation of air, water, land, wildlife, and other natural resources of the state. In 1972, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act created the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits. Some of the farms on this call have NPDES permits or have applied for NPDES permits in the past. And it was basically to cure those pipes, all those liquid wastes that were allowed to go into the water in the 1899 Act. This is where we finally started cleaning those up. And I'm not sure how Connecticut 1973's Economic Enforcement Act actually dealt with water quality. I haven't dug deep enough into that one to figure out why that was an economic act, but that's where Connecticut was, as far as I could find out, was the first state or the first place that introduced the concept of total maximum daily loads, where we looked at all the pollutions in a watershed and then tried to determine how much pollution that water body could accept. And I think we've led the country in that one. In 1984, we had some wells up in the north central part of the state where they grow tobacco. It got contaminated with ethylene dibromide, and DEP established a groundwater protection program to start helping municipalities protect the groundwater quality as opposed to the surface water quality. In 1989, USDA's water quality control program plan came out, and I can remember being a young age, and I was in the state for like 6 months. I came here in July of 1988. And one of my first things that I had to do was do some proofreading on this manual of best management practices for agriculture. In 1999, EPA created the CAFO general permit, which most other states of the union adopted for various and sundry reasons that a couple people on this call besides myself can probably remember. We in Connecticut never implemented the general permit for years because at the time it wasn't a politically acceptable thing to create. And that just brings us right here to tonight's meeting to talk about the fact that in 2023, DEP did in fact have the general permit come into effect for certain farms in the state. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and let the DEP talk about the general permit so that we have something to get started with here. I'm not sure who's going to start talking for DEP, so whoever it is, I will shut up and let you jump in.
That's me. Hang on one second. I just want to get, I had questions over here. Oops, sorry. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay. So hello, my name is Emily Marshall. I'm thankful to have met some of you this past week, and I look forward to meeting everyone else as I transition into this new role. So on this call, also from DEEP, are Helen Lunsford, which is the supervisor for the NPDES permitting program, Audra Dixon, the Water Permitting and Enforcement Division Director, and Michelle Gore, the Water Permitting and Enforcement Division Assistant Director. So with that, I will jump right into the presentation on the Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations, or CAFO General Permit. So I also had a brief history, as Rich did. So an overview of more of CAFOs. So the term first appeared in 1972 Clean Water Act. However, it was not defined then. In 1974, feedlots were defined under the effluent limitation guidelines, which were the first definition of this term and used by farmers across America. It wasn't until 1976, due to the NRDC versus Train case, that the term CAFO took the place of feedlots. And although the definition of the two are very similar, the ruling also helped in defining which facilities were CAFOs and establishing permitting requirements. So years later, in 1999, the Unified National Strategy for Animal Feeding Operations was published, and this established national goals and performance expectations for all AFOs. So to accomplish these goals, the strategy established the use of CNMPs to help minimize impact on water quality and public health. The USDA developed 6 elements of a CNMP, which were 1, manure and wastewater holding and storage, or handling and storage; 2, nutrient management; 3, land treatment practices; 4, record keeping; 5, feed management; and 6, other manure and wastewater use options. So in 2003, the regulations guiding CAFO permits and operations were revised to require CAFOs to apply for an NPDES permit. All CAFOs that held an NPDES permit were then required to develop and implement a nutrient management plan. However, due to the Waterkeeper et al. The EPA court case, the CAFO rule changed again. So the final rule was revised in 2008, which is still the current rule, that only CAFOs that discharge or propose to discharge wastewater need to register for a permit. And the CNMP will be included as part of that registration. So I wanted to include this slide just to show which regulations we will be referring to in the general permit. We will be sending out a copy of this after, so you don't need to rush to write anything down, but at the bottom there will be links as well that will help you get to these regulations. So you can't be a CAFO without first being an AFO. And an AFO is a feedlot or building or group of feedlots or buildings at the lot or facility where one, animals are or will be stabled or confined and fed or maintained for 45 days or more in any 12-month period. And the 12-month period does not have to be the calendar year. It can also be, say, August to August. And also, two, crops, vegetation, forage growth, or post-harvest residues are not sustained in the normal growing season over any portion of the lot or facility, which just means that the animals can't be where the food is, essentially. So once a facility has been designated an AFO, we can now look at the CAFO designations. So large CAFOs are defined solely on the animal units that the facility has. So dairy farms are the largest industry in Connecticut, and it can be seen here that a large CAFO facility would need 700 or more mature dairy cows, either milked or dry. Medium CAFOs are also defined by the number of animal units that the facility has, but there is a second criteria for this designation. So medium CAFOs also have to have a discharge of pollutants into the waters of the US through either a man-made ditch, flushing system, or other man-made device, or they discharge directly into the waters of the US that pass over, across, or through the facility, or they otherwise come in contact with the confined animals. And a small CAFO can be considered anything that is not a large or a medium CAFO. And just as a side note, 2 or more AFOs under common ownership equal a single AFO for purposes of determining if it is a CAFO. And common ownership is based on the properties adjoining each other or if they use a common area or system for waste disposal. So the CAFO general permit is not a continuous discharge permit. So this discharge or this permit covers discharges under catastrophic or chronic rainfall conditions from facilities that are designed, constructed, and operated to hold all agricultural waste, wastewater, and runoff from at least a 25-year, 24-hour rainfall event. The permit also covers discharges to ground and surface water that are in accordance with the approved CNMP for the facility. Any discharge of water, substance, or material into the waters of the US other than these are not authorized under this permit. There is one discharge exemption for this permit, and that is the agricultural stormwater discharge exemption. This includes stormwater discharge from any land application area where agricultural waste and or agricultural wastewater has been applied in accordance with the CNMP. So who must file a registration? So any person seeking authorization for discharge associated with CAFO must register. So the Connecticut CAFO general permit, as Rich mentioned, was issued in January 1st, 2023, which means the existing large and medium CAFOs must register within 365 days or December 31st, 2023. So typically after the first round of registrants that automatically meet the CAFO criteria, there will be an opportunity for the commissioner to designate a facility as a CAFO. If this is the case, they will have 180 days after being notified to submit a registration. And lastly, if there are any new CAFOs, these facilities will have 180 days prior to their initial discharge to register. So to find the registration form, I just kind of wanted to show you how to do it in the easiest way that I found, because it can be a little confusing on the website. So hang on, I have this pulled up. So can you see the search engine? Okay. So what you can do to find the registration form is you can just honestly type in any search engine, Connecticut wastewater permits, and wait for this water discharge permit and general permits to pop up for ct.gov. And once you click on this, it'll take you to the water discharge permits and general permits page, which you can scroll down past all of these and go about halfway down the page to general permits. And you'll find the concentrated animal feeding operation permit right here, along with the registration form in Word format or PDF and the instructions on how to fill out that registration form. So that is just a helpful link. And if you ever need help finding that, again, just email me or call me. I know it can get confusing on our website sometimes. And okay, so back. So this is just, I just wanted to include a slide with what the registration form looked like, just so you have an idea. This obviously isn't the whole thing. This is just the first page, just to be clear. So I also included an image of the CNMP review because that is something that you will be submitting with the registration. So this is kind of how we will be reviewing it, and that is also just the first page as well. So after the permit application and with the CNMP are submitted, this is the process. So DEEP staff will review the permit and draft an approval of registration. Then the registration form, CNMP, and draft approval of registration will be posted on the Connecticut DEEP website for public comment, where it will stay for 30 days. After the public comment period has ended, the commissioner may require the CAFO owner or operator to revise the CNMP. And finally, DEEP will include the responses to public comments and the commissioner's final approval of registration on the DEEP website. So we recognize that there may be further questions, and we want you to know that we are happy to meet or come out to your farm if you have any questions or if you just want to meet. So I wanted to give my contact information. I'm, again, Emily Marshall, so I have my email and phone number there. There's also Helen Lunsford, who's my supervisor. Her email's there. And I do want to point out that we recently developed a CAFO email for DEEP that you can email questions or updates pertaining to your farm. It's at the top here. It's cafo.coordinator@ct.gov. And lastly, there is one more link I wanted to show you that could be helpful. So on our website, you can go to the agricultural wastewater page. And this again has the permit with the public comments, a fact sheet, and it just has some helpful information, again, with links to other services as well, and some links at the bottom that might be helpful to any farmer looking to apply. Okay. I see Nancy has her hand raised. I don't know if you want to.
I do. Do me a favor. I am not the
Yes.
contact for the Farm Services Agency.
You are not? Okay, that's good to know. Oh, sorry.
So before you send this out, could you make that change?
I definitely will. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Does anyone else have any questions?
What do you consider a discharge?
In what context? For the whole permit?
Correct.
So this one, let me go in. So these discharge, oh, sorry, it's clicking. The discharges for the CAFO permit are just the catastrophic and chronic rainfall discharges. So that's if there's a severe event, that would be a discharge under the CAFO permit. So any other discharge, such as like any silage leachate coming off, or I guess like from any other industrial thing, that would be something not authorized by this permit. I don't know if that answered your question fully.
So like basically, if we don't discharge, does that mean we don't have to have a CAFO?
Technically, this permit is for if you discharge, so.
Well, the discharge is also after you apply too. You said you'd have to, you have to apply to a nutrient management plan, and if you didn't have the paperwork, right, someone could.
It's the permit itself is something that can help protect a farmer from any third-party lawsuit or anything that, say, a neighbor is complaining about a smell. The permit or the farm having this permit will help protect them in the sense that if you're following the CNMP to the dot, then you're protected. So they can't do anything legally.
Anyone else have a question? Kind of hard to see everybody.
I think Ben Brun does. He has his hand raised.
Sure, Ben.
Yeah, so kind of following on Jim's point there, it's up to us to make the determination whether or not we're CAFOs, it appears.
So yes and no, because a large CAFO is based solely on the number of animals you have. Whereas if you're a medium CAFO and you do have one of these, you're also polluting and you would need to be covered by the CAFO permit.
So I guess that's what I'm getting at. I mean, if we don't discharge technically into a waterway, we don't technically have to have a CAFO permit, correct?
Yep. That is correct.
Well, for mediums, it's correct. It's not for the large.
For larges, it's you fall directly into it. I'm not sure if we have many large CAFOs in the state, but
Half a dozen probably.
I have to look at the list again. And again, if you have any questions for later, I can always talk to you about it further if you want to discuss, if you feel you should be applying for this or not. And we can always discuss that down the line as well, if you have more questions.
Would you visit a farm if they asked to try to help make that determination?
Of course, yeah, we would definitely come out, and if you want us to, we can take a look and determine together if CAFO permit is the best route for you.
All right, well, I don't see any more people with questions, so I guess we'll turn this over to Nancy and Julie to see who's going to talk for NRCS first.
Okay, let me get back. Oh, there's stuff sharing.
Alrighty then, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So tonight I'm going to give a very brief overview on a comprehensive nutrient management plan that comes from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I am Nancy Furlow. I know I've met a lot of you. I am the state resource conservationist here in Connecticut. And with me tonight are Julie McGivern, our agronomist, and Sam Bellinger, who is one of our nutrient management planners, as well as Ben Russa, who is another nutrient management planner. You may have seen them out on your farms. So these are the people who will be helping you with your CNMP. All right, fine, be that way. There we go. So Rich asked me to discuss a number of questions. And the first one was, what role does NRCS play in helping farmers comply with the Connecticut CAFO permit? And the role we play is to provide you with a comprehensive nutrient management plan. And you've seen that in the permit, and that is something that they will be looking for. So here is an extensive definition of what a comprehensive nutrient management plan is. It's a site specific. So we come out to your farm, we look at everything, your fields, your farmstead, all of this. Developed for an animal feeding operation, which you've just learned the definition of, or user of the byproducts of an animal feeding operation. So that's people who get your manure might want to have a comprehensive nutrient management plan as well. So it's got two components. It's got a component about the production area, which is your farmstead. That's your confinement, your feed areas, raw materials storage, waste handling containments, any sort of storage areas, silage leachate, milk house waste, all of those sorts of things. So that's part A, and part B is the land treatment area. That's all the land under control upon which you spread manure. It's rented, owned, leased, given to you, however you process this land. If you're putting stuff on it, any sort of wastewater, manure, something like that, that is your land treatment area. Okay, CNMP includes a description of all the existing conditions. Sometimes people call it a benchmark condition. The resource concerns that are found on the farm, that's whether you have resource concerns or whether the planners discuss with you what they see as resource concerns. Recommendations for addressing those resource concerns, and a schedule of implementation for the practices that you're going to do to address those resource concerns. So again, the areas that are covered are the farmstead and any associated agricultural lands, again called the production area, and all your cropland, pastures, hayland, that's all the land treatment area. So structural practices, you know the drill, waste storage facilities, the heavy use areas, all the roofs and covers. On the top right is a compost facility. There's a heavy use area on the bottom left. And of course, the ever-present big blue tank that a lot of people have seen. And it also covers any pipes, pumps, waste movement components, diversions, waterways, gutters, anything to keep the clean water clean and the dirty water contained. And then, of course, land treatment practices are your nutrient management, the record keeping thereof, any erosion control practices that are needed, so the manure that you put on the field stays on the field. And if you're doing pastures, prescribed grazing. So why does a farm need one? Well, for NRCS, you need a CNMP when requesting funding for a waste storage or treatment facility, land utilization, that sort of stuff all needs to be done based upon a comprehensive nutrient management. And the CNMP for NRCS is initiated by the farmer to assess and document their resource concerns and to develop the plan for conserving natural resource goals while meeting your production goals. So that's why you would need one for NRCS. Now for the DEEP, you need one in order to comply with your permit. So what does it require? It requires field visits to document the producer objectives, any existing conditions, all of the resource concerns. It requires soil tests so that we can look at the soil, look at the amount of manure you're producing, come up with a nutrient balance that would work for spreading on your fields. It requires decisions on what practices you want to address those resource concerns. It also requires record keeping about all of the nutrients that you have either applied or moved off site, because that all goes into the nutrient balance about what gets spread on your fields. Now, did you want me to go into this, Rich, or save it for the next section?
You can go into it now, Nancy, if you want.
Okay. So we do have some assistance available. First of all, we can develop a nutrient management plan in-house with NRCS, where the producer provides all the field information, the soil tests, the manure tests, and all of that sort of stuff. Or the producer can get a contract with NRCS to hire a technical service provider who is a third party that will come out to write your CNMP. Or some people have gone straight to a technical service provider and done it on their own so that they could get to implementation faster. And the obligatory non-discrimination statement. So are there any questions? I've stunned you all into silence.
That's rare.
Okay,
Nobody has anything.
Oh, I have a quick question. So what is the typical time frame for composing a CNMP or putting one together?
typical time frame for a technical service provider is the application period for the equip contract, which can be 6, 8 months, maybe a year. And then they have a year to complete the CNMP with a technical service provider. Or if they choose to do it in-house, a lot of it depends upon how fast the information gets to us and what the workload is on the staff. And so a year or two. If
Okay,
we're
thanks.
doing an addendum to an existing CNMP, it takes a little less time.
So I'll ask a question because I know some farmers are confused. You register for the general permit. You have a year to register for the general permit. If you think you meet this criteria, or if Emily comes out and says you meet this criteria, does the CNMP have to be completed or just signed up for and being in progress in that first year to apply for the general permit? It says you need a CNMP, but does it have to be complete and signed, or does it just have to be working on it?
Sorry. So I think it has to be complete, which it says in the permit. If you do get to a certain point, you want to read it. It does say that the CNMP is part of the application. So then that would assume that you're submitting a complete CNMP.
So what's the catch-22 for the farmers if it takes a year or two to get it, and we only have 3/4 of a year left before the deadline runs out for some farmers already?
So I would have, so in the permit, or in the general permit itself, it states that they can use, I think it was NRCS, also other certified authority to write their CNMP. So it does have that year time frame, and that's something that we have to follow. So they can use other resources as well for writing the CNMP.
Anybody else? No more questions?
Yeah, what happens if we can't complete it? In time?
I'll have to look back at the permit and I can get back to you on that, but I want to get the exact language of it before. And I can discuss that with you one-on-one if you would like as well. I just have to refresh. Oh, sorry, my mic was up. Did you hear that?
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay, sorry.
I guess I'm going to ask this because I don't have anybody response from the Department of Ag, so I can skip that piece. Nancy already talked about what NRCS can do. Is there anything DEEP can do? Is there any talk at the state level about helping to fund some of these things? Because some of these practices for farmers to implement these CNMPs are expensive. I mean, a manure storage, like in that picture, is $1 million or more.
So I was just informed there is 319 grant money. I'm not super familiar with that. Audra, if you wanted to speak on that.
So I'm not sure who's familiar with the 319 grant program, but it is a program that's administered by EPA where they essentially fund projects to help reduce pollution. And so usually they're focused on like non-point source reductions, but that can help include like cattle enclosures, moving cows from streams. We can get you in touch with somebody if you're interested with that. It's handled in our water quality group.
Okay. Ben, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just maybe I'll weigh in a little bit here. I'm thinking back to when I worked on my CNMP, and I've had 2 and 1 addendum. The first one was probably the most smooth. I worked with Rich, took a couple of years. Second one was bumpy. Went through a couple different technical service providers. I would say 3 years would have been a conservative estimate for what that took start to finish. And the issue with some of these CNMPs is because, and they're an integral part of your CAFO permit, is that to carry them out is very expensive. And the concept that NRCS tried to get instituted here, or actually changed to in the last several years, was a progression towards compliance, not absolute compliance. And that's a very, very important concept that I think gets missed in the CAFO. So you have absolutes and you have absolute penalties, and they're not insignificant. They're enough to put any farmer out of business in pretty short order. And it loses the concept that's probably the most important thing that we have as farmers to work with. Part of that you have to understand from our point of view is that the absolute isn't always necessarily the right answer. It changes through time. That's the advantage of being an old man, is you see things that were supposed to be perfect 15 years ago that today are irrelevant. And you see something that was irrelevant 15 years ago that today is a principal focus. And so the other thing that happens is the goalposts keep moving. Okay, what we think is the right thing to do, again, tagging onto that same concept, but within the CNMP or within the world of UConn, which I think helps develop some of the standards, let's call it the phosphorus standard, sitting there lurking in the background. These can be very, very, very significant. And the thing is that the CAFOs may set up an impossible goal, not just one that you can't get to no matter what you do if you have animal agriculture. So I get very, I don't know, call it concerned for food production in the state on a commercial level, which most of these CAFOs as defined it at both the large and the medium level do that, and being able to stay in business. So this Connecticut was incredibly slow in getting to where we are today. Took the bulk of Joe Edelman's career. And part of that was out of respect for what we needed to do every day on our farms to get, I'll call it good, wholesome, nutritious milk to market. But now that we're starting to put stakes in the ground, it's getting to be an entirely different game. And we saw, I know a couple of you were out at the Canyon Valley Ag Co-op meeting, and I see Cricket just signed on, and I think you very eloquently talked about the importance of looking around and seeing what's there, seeing what works, and trying to incorporate that. So I hope, I'll get to the bottom line here. I hope, or maybe against hope, that we somehow have this CAFO permit being a living document that can respond to these situations and not get up against December 31st, 2023 with this is the drop dead date and this is what had to be done, which is unfortunately where I think we're at right now. So I think if I were to make any kind of recommendation, it would be to make this a living document and make it livable So those two things. And I think Emily and Helen, as your supervisor, and perhaps maybe director and Deep has to start to look at the reality of the situation. On the other end of it, you guys don't even know what 319 grants are, and that may be the lifeblood of getting some of this stuff done. And the things that happen, there are grant opportunities. And I'm going right, I'm finishing my speech, Rich, so I'm not gonna have more to say later. But the coordination of having this money be available to get projects completed on a timely basis, and the availability of that money at the same time, and these stakes in the ground that now exist, we have chaos coming. We don't have an organized progression towards getting better. And my last thought will be, there's not a farmer on this call nor a farmer that I've ever met that didn't want to participate in this progression towards doing a better job of what we do. So that's a very important thing for Deep as a regulator, as a very significant regulator, to take into consideration when perhaps you make this document a living document that can be, that can understand what we're up against. So that's what I got for tonight.
Jim Smith, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, the other, the CNMP is the same thing. That's also a living document. Those things change from season to season. We pick up more land, we lose land, things change. And that's part of the problem. And we started that process, I think it's almost 5 years ago, and was sitting on the desk at Deep, waiting to get approved, because every 10 minutes the thing changed. So it's another consideration, you have to make.
So this is Audra Dixon with Deep. I think it's important to remember that this is the first general permit the state's issued, but on a national level, CAFO permits have been issued for many years. And so I agree that Connecticut was definitely behind in that aspect. I would say the permit and the NMP are living documents, and they should be flexible. And those NOPs should be written conservatively, but also to give you the flexibility to add land, remove land, change agronomic rates as you need to. So that way you're not coming to us for every little tiny change, right? That doesn't make any sense. You can't operate a farm that way. My background is from the state of Georgia. And so I'm very familiar with the farming community in terms of what they need to be able to do for flexibility. And so those are the things that we want to hear about. That's what I want to hear about from this group here, to continue that conversation so that way we can do better, right? We're not boots on the ground. We're not farmers. We need to understand some of the operations to write better documents. But the NMP is an important component, and to the point of whether or not you need a permit or not, a lot of it is a risk-based decision. And that's something that, as a group, if you're a medium-sized farmer, you have to make that decision on your own. That's not something we can make for you. You guys are familiar with risk as farmers. It's primarily what you do. So I do appreciate the comments tonight, and I appreciate the discussion, and I hope it is the beginning of that discussion.
Jim, Ben said he was going to give up. He had made his pitch. So do you have anything else to offer? Because you were one of the speakers too, from a farm perspective, to say, I know you've been looking at this stuff. You said you've been working at it for years. So what are the big catching points? What's it going to cost? What do we need to provide to farmers to make this stuff work?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to be a financial, the financial part of it. You're talking, we could spend a couple $1 million to be in full compliance, pretty easy. That, and then, the labor shortage too, find the labor to carry out the, what you need to do. Those are probably the two biggest challenges of the whole process.
So there are 3 software systems that exist, and Purdue University, Cornell University, they have developed programs to help you write that NMP. And so you're not having to rely on third-party contractors. And I understand NRCS and their resource constraints. It's the same as Deep, where, that 2-year time frame is not palatable, right? That doesn't help anybody. And so I think we need to consider that discussion and look at the resources that are already available, that are free and accessible to everyone.
I think it's more than writing it though. It's, it's what you got to do to comply with it afterwards. The equipment, the extra equipment you need, the storage you need. It's those things that I'm more worried about than getting that written.
No, I understand that. And I think there's something to be said for, putting a program in place, in my opinion, a bit late, right? Because these ponds and your wastewater treatment systems that are already installed, they're already on the books, right? They're already on your farm. And so we've got to figure out a way to incorporate some of those things where we can. And so the more we can learn from you, and I know it's not great to have, deep at your farm. I know nobody wants that. The more we can learn, the better off we're all going to be, because we can develop that program together. Because that is the beginning of the program here. I know Joe took quite some time doing that. I'm not sure he did that to your service though, because you've already spent millions of dollars, right? To put systems in place, and to have to go retrofit is not ideal.
Cricket, you offered to speak tonight. You got some thoughts you want to share?
Sure, I'll share a little bit with the group. I don't know what I have for time, just a few minutes. I apologize here for jumping in late. I was in some other meetings and maybe a little underprepared to be before this group. Really chimed in here very late, very hard for me to kind of come in and maybe share my perspective so I don't duplicate some processes. But here's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about the general permit that's coming forward for our farm, Laurelbrook Farm, up here in East Canaan, Connecticut. As I think we just need to take a step back. To Rich's point, none of us, especially ourselves, knew that this was never going to be avoided. At some point in time, this general permit would be issued in the state of Connecticut. It's what it looks like when you actually get these contracts written. Then that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I think I just want to take it from this perspective. I hope the intention from everyone here is that we are looking to really preserve the farms that we have. And we have very different business models than other parts of the country. And I do believe that food production is a national security issue. We want to be part of continued dairy farming operation, producing high quality milk for generations to come. That is our commitment. We have a lot of work to do at our own farm, as we have really worked with our permit process, developing our booklet, if you will, as it's about to be implemented, with a few things that come to mind as challenges that we're working with. I want to go number one. Probably the biggest challenge that I see is, and I hope that Deep and everybody on this call will do, is learn from others. As farmers, that's what we do best. We align ourselves with, I think, the good people, and good things happen. I would ask that we not, try to develop unique situations for our own state, but we learn from others. I'm going to lean on New York, because we are just 15 miles, 12 miles from the border. I travel a lot in New England. I talk to other states. I hear it. I can tell you what states I don't want to farm in and where I would rather farm in. I have that perspective a little bit. But vegetative treatment areas, VTAs in New York, I hope that we can move that concept to Connecticut, as it's really important for us to be able to move product from silage leachate or calf hutches, using vegetative areas to handle the runoff from that, instead of worrying about just capturing every single gallon of water. There is a huge cost. There's, to me, more of an environmental detriment to those types of situations. So I look for open-mindedness, and I look for communications to other states on how they've been able to work with this. And I feel a soft approach is better than a hard approach as we implement some of these programs. I think the other piece that is really important, even though we've known for years the CAFO permit is coming, we need time. We have now the document of what this looks like. I know, for example, New York had 6 to 10 years to implement these types of things. It's alignment of funding, it's resources, It's the people behind the scenes to make sure that we are doing the right things on our farm to move our farms forward for what we need for future success of our operations to get us into the future. And I think if we just take strong, quick, swift moves, knee-jerk reactions, we will waste people's money, and it would be it would not be a good thing for the dairy industry. So I would hope that we could spend the time, align the resources, and align the financial situation for our farms to be able to comply, because we are committed to doing it. And the third point I would like to make is nutrient. So I'm just really trying to understand a little bit of the plan, the booklet that I'm referring to. And I'm under the understanding that it must be submitted annually. For example, I heard Jim Smith mention that, crop rotations may change. Soil samples may come in, things may change. That has to go somewhere for approval. In my mind, I think it's really important that the planner has the ability to make those decisions and take it away from having to send this stuff in to get approval. Time on the farms is of essence, and the weather is, we have short windows to work with. And I think here in Connecticut, we are quite a bit different in a sense that we rent a lot of land versus own. And when we deal with 100+ different landowners I know on our own farm, their minds change. And what they would like may not meet what our plan looks like, and we may have to adapt. So we need adaptability, functionality of programs as we implement these types of projects, I believe, in Connecticut. So with that, I tried to keep it to 3. And I guess my last statement would be around this. The last thing I would want us to do is to make liars out of farmers. And if we go too far overreaching, you're going to get that. And we don't want to be, or we do not want to be that. So when we get to those complex and hard, decisions that we're making, we need to be really careful about our journey together as we go about this. We are committed to complying with CAFO and working with it, but we just need the practicality component of this applied to what regulations we are working with. And thank you for probably 5 minutes of time here.
Brandon, I see you joined us. Are you prepared to talk, or are you still planting corn?
Sorry, yeah. No, I'm actually working on the planner right now, so I can't talk, but I'm trying to listen every chance I get here.
All right, well, if Brandon can't talk for Oak Ridge Farm, I'm going to open it up to questions from anyone and everyone on the call. Anyone for the good of the cause. You can get out of here earlier if we don't have anything, but if you've got something to say, raise your hand or open your mic and talk.
So this
I
is
have a
Audra from
question.
Food Again. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had a question for Emily. So you had mentioned, or you talked in the chat about the 5 years for the general permit. If a farmer plans on a CNMP to add new practices, and in 5 years goes to reapply for the general permit, but was not able to install the practices that they had planned on the CNMP for the original general permit, is that going to be a problem for them when they try to reapply 5 years later?
So usually we have a compliance schedule, and we do. I know you guys are all mentioning we do want to work with you. So we will work with the compliance schedule and try to make it so it can work with everybody. We don't want, obviously, any of those things anyone was mentioning to happen. So we will work with a compliance schedule, and we can make that happen, I'm pretty sure.
If a farmer logs on the Purdue's website and becomes his technical service provider and constructs a nutrient management plan, will NRCS accept that plan and allow that person to apply for EQIP funding?
Funding for what, Ben? The practices or the plan?
No, EQIP funding, we've written the plan now because we signed on to the website and we understand that we've written it. Now we want to apply for funds for drainage in a field or a manure storage area. Will you accept that nutrient management plan? Because you said that that is a part of the requirements of applying for EQIP, is having a comprehensive nutrient management plan that has been accepted, adopted. I'm not quite sure, and I believe it has to go to DEEP also, right, in order before it's 100%.
Yes, it has to be reviewed by NRCS, and then it goes to DEEP to also be reviewed.
So how many handwritten plans have you seen that you've adopted, that you've accepted?
Written by the farmer?
Yes.
Because some people have hired consultants to write them.
No, I'm talking about the free one that was discussed earlier.
I have not seen anybody that has submitted one of those.
Okay, because I think it would be pretty tough to come up with those calculations on a. For example, I don't feel competent to make those engineering decisions for my own farm.
Yeah, Ben, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's something that we need to look into. So the free software that exists is literally a program where you're inputting what is on your farm, and it's doing the calculations on the back end for you, right? And so if you're liquid manure, you're dry manure, you've got 3 ponds, you got 2 ponds, you got 600 cows, 200 cows. It's prompting you with questions, and you're kind of filling in the blanks as you go. So happy to look into that with you, or anybody else who's interested in it. I know there are softwares that are used in the southeastern region all the time. So it's not a foreign thing nationally, but I understand that it's new here in Connecticut.
Okay.
Audra?
And I'm going to echo what Emily said, is that DEEP is not looking to put farmers out of business. We want to work with you. We have our own requirements and obligations under the Clean Water Act. And so, we need to understand more about the farming practices here to write better permits and to give you the time to do what you need to do. I would say that, the 20 years it took to write the general permit is a pretty long time. So I don't think we need your reaction to anything. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of needing the flexibility. And I've seen plans, I've approved plans that have that flexibility built into them. So you can pivot and move year to year as you need to. We just have to think kind of big picture in terms of what could happen on the farm. So that way you don't pigeonhole yourself, so to speak, right? And you get stuck in a situation where you're having to submit it for renewal and plans. DEEP doesn't have the resources to review those year after year after year either. So we need to give you that flexibility on the front end.
Audra, are you talking about nutrient management plans, which are just concerned with the what kind of manure you have, how you're spreading it, what rates you're spreading it at? Or are you also talking about the engineering portion of things, how big a waste storage facility you need, what you need for silage, leachate, or milkhouse waste, or any of that?
That's a good question. The software systems that I'm aware of today are really focused kind of on that you already have infrastructure in-house. You already have ponds built. It's not on the design of it. I'm not aware of any software system that would do that on the front.
Anybody else have any thoughts or concerns, or are we done for tonight?
Hey, Rich, I've got a minute here. Do you have any questions? I missed most of the meeting, but if you have any questions for me or anything, I got a minute here.
Yeah, could you just share with us what your farm has been going through, trying to figure out how you're going to comply with like the stormwater management pieces? I know you're in the middle of building a digester project for some pieces, but you have a good manure storage, but you still have a lot of stormwater challenges and things like that. So share with us a little bit of what's going on that way.
Sure. So right now we've got kind of a temporary storage that's an old manure pit, and it's capturing it, but it's a lot of work to haul that leachate water out every time it rains, basically. And so what we're trying to do is we've got a whole new system designed, and it's been approved by the state to capture 100% of the runoff. And the problem is it's about a $2.6 million project. And we do have a little bit of funding from EQIP for that, but we applied for the Climate Smart grant through the Department of Ag and did not receive that. So we're still coming up like 1.9 million short on that. And that's really kind of the biggest thing on our end is we found that the cost trying to get that project implemented is kind of the deterring factor here. We do have a deadline with our CAFO permit, and I did have to submit a request for an extension on that whole project because we're not compliant. And I'm actually working with Emily on that right now, trying to get that all figured out. But the long and short, it's a lot of money to spend to just capture rainwater. And we don't know, I mean, as long as there's funding opportunities, we're going to keep applying, but you know, it's a matter of money at this point. One thing that we are looking at is a new design of a RO system that some people have put in place, and it would basically take all of that leachate water and clean it up and we could put it back in the brook if we could get the discharge permit for that. But again, that system is, I think, like little over $2 million just for that as well. So there's a lot of options, but for right now, it's just really expensive trying to get all these projects in place. And again, it's just dealing with majority of rainwater, and there's no good options out there. I know, Rich, you had suggested maybe putting up some type of a structure that goes over our silage piles, but the size of that would just be enormous, and it's not practical. Maybe on for someone that's not putting up that much silage, it might be a good option, but it isn't very practical for what we're doing. We'd have to have several different barns, but it would definitely be a way to capture that leachate. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. And again, I missed most of the call here, so I apologize for that, but I don't know. Does that answer anything there, Rich?
Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of what we needed to hear, because money's going to be the big ticket. I mean, let's face it. These things are not cheap.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
Awful quiet. I guess we're done.
I would just say it was quiet, but I can't hold back and just respond a little bit to what I heard from Oak Ridge on the runoff, the stormwater. Here we go. It's leachate areas could be quite a solution instead of containment, and more cost effective and more of a practical approach in my mind. A thought to consider as some of our neighbor states are doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we want to look into, right? Because if it's working in other places, right, we're not recreating the wheel. I don't know that deep staff has enough knowledge on what those things look like. And so to your point, I think we need to go learn from some of the neighbor states on how to deal with that. I know in other areas, they'll divert rainwater from areas and get coverage under different types of permit that are more registration only, right? And so the water that we're really concerned about is the water that's coming in contact with manure or some sort of processed wastewater. So we can control sort of the definition a little bit of what processed wastewater is, right? And all of the wastewater traded on a farm dinner, it's not all the same, right? And so we need to think about that, and maybe we can come up with practices, and they may already exist in other places. that we just don't know about yet. But like I mentioned, I think we want to continue working with you guys. We want to understand some of the challenges with the volumes of water. Getting out to the farms is helpful for us, so we can understand and have a conversation with you. You can walk us around to teach us about what that's like here in Connecticut.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in here quick. The little bit I heard there, Cricket, what you were saying about with buffers before it goes to the stream, that's actually like a really good idea. If there was a way that we could work around that. I know one of the other things that we're up against with our CNMP is our boundaries, like along the edges of the fields, typically do not get any nutrients. We have to go out and spread a lot of those areas with commercial fertilizer because we can't inject right up to the edge, or if there's a well and we have a setback, we've got a minimum of 35 feet setbacks on a lot of our edges that border waterways. And so I think we need to take a harder look as well at the CNMP aspect of this, because we're giving up a lot of acres. The average field size on our farm, I think, is about right around 30 acres. And there's just a lot of acres around the edge of the field when it comes down to it. We need a way to, if we're injecting, try to push those setbacks a little bit further, because all those nutrients are going in the ground and they're not really going anywhere. If we were broadcasting, that'd be a different story because of runoff and a lot more things. But I think we've kind of just adopted a kind of a one size fits all method to this thing. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right approach. But if we, could take a harder look at doing what makes sense. And I think at the end of the day, all of this just has to make sense. It's got to be practical. It has to work for the farmer. And I think there has to be an understanding at the level of the governments that we're in this to make a profit, and we're not in it to destroy the land, because we know if we do, we're not going to be profitable. We're not in it to ruin the environment. Like, we need it to be healthy soil. We need this land to produce for us because that's how we make a living. And I think there's a little bit of a mentality that the farmers have to have their hands held, and we have to be told kind of how to run an operation, if that makes sense. And I think maybe the benefit of the doubt's not given to the farmer, that we really want to do what's the best for the environment, because at the end of the day, that's how we are profitable as well. So just a couple thoughts there, I guess, on the CNMP aspect of it.
Any other final thoughts? Any suggestions for next steps? Where do we go from here?
We need money. I think it boils down to that. We just need the money.
It's money, alignment, and time. And let's make sure we're thinking through these processes. I hope that you've walked away here tonight with a better understanding a little bit of some of what we're facing at the farm, and how we might be able to adopt or adapt to things that we're doing too. And I think it's a give and take on both sides to be successful. I think a lot about, when you have this, you have the perfect farm, so to speak, but just realize that we are making steps in the right direction each and every day. And that's where our mind is. And we're going to be part of that solution, and we're going to work with you all the way. But please, we're looking for this to be a two-way street, and that's all we're asking for. So I thank you, everybody, tonight for listening and being able, and Rich for putting together this call for us.
Yeah, thanks, Rich, too. And, I think it's true. I think there's a lot of economic benefits to these farms long-term that, as we follow these practices, right? But, it takes a lot of capital to get them kicked off. That's all. So it's got to be kind of a long-term vision. Let's put it that way. And, I think next steps would be is, continue the dialogue that we're having here tonight with each other and start walking down the path of getting them approved.
Well, thank you. I'm happy it helped. I hope we can keep this discussion up. If anyone wants to get out on farms, I'm sure we could set up tours. I had Emily and Helen out this week, but if we want anyone else that feels the need, wants to go out and look at farms, talk to farms, let us know. We'll all be happy to host people or take you around. Farmers don't mind sharing. They'll walk around with you and show you what you got. They're not going to hide it from you.
Okay, thank you, Rich. We appreciate that. So.
Well, then I guess I don't see anybody else raising hands or wanting to talk. So I guess we can end this discussion and say thank you and good night, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks,
All right.
Rich.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rich. Yeah, we're glad we could be a part of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Good night.